Early voting kicks off on Saturday in New York, and one of the most closely watched races will be the busy Democratic primary for the state's 12th congressional district. One of the candidates is former conservative lawyer George Conway, and he has made it crystal clear that a vote for him is a vote against Trump. And George Conway joins us now. So, George, we've had you on the show many times on political panels. So you are probably familiar to our viewers. Our viewers may know that we have had other candidates from this race on, and we're here to talk with you about the race specifically.
Okay.
So I tend to think of you as kind of like a center-right, constitutional conservative. You were until recently a registered Republican, right?
Until 2018.
2018, I guess. So not that recently, but you were a Republican for a long time. And you found common cause with Democrats over Trump. The district that you are running in is a D+33 district.
Yes.
Right. So I think our viewers and your potential voters may want to know, why should they vote for someone who was, until recently, a Republican who has these sort of constitutional conservative bona fides, given that the job of congressman, the job that you are running for, is not only about impeaching Trump, subpoenaing things related to Trump, but also about Medicaid and the safety net and taxing the rich and other things that Democrats may care about? Well,
I believe in all those things. I believe that the government needs to do more to help people have affordable health care, that needs to do some more to bring down the cost of housing and bring down the cost of groceries and get rid of these crazy tariffs that cause that and get rid of the, this war that's causing gasoline prices to go up. I agree on basically the objects of what Democrats in this district want. And the point of my campaign is that, how do you get there? How do you get there with President Trump? How do you get there with a president who's basically running the country like a mob operation, running the country for himself as opposed to running for the people? My view is that you're putting the cart before the horse if you think that somehow you can have a bunch of policy points and nicely drafted bills that somehow you're going to offer up to fix all these problems when Donald Trump is president. He's not going to sign them. Maybe you can trick him into thinking that it's a crypto deal for Don Jr. and he signs it. But is he going to enforce those laws? The man who tried to shut down the Department of Education without statutory mandate, the man who has been ordered by immigration courts in immigration cases thousands of times not to do the same thing over and over again, the man who just got himself immunity from taxation, the man who is committing high crimes and misdemeanors, insider trading every day. There's a Watergate scandal a week, and I think it's kind of weird that people are saying, well, let's talk about affordability, let's talk about housing and all of that, when you're ignoring what is standing in the way of getting all that done, which is this criminal. And that's the point of my campaign, to show people you can't do one without the other. If you want to have a government that's responsive, that's going to do the things that the people of New York 12 want,
So does that mean that Democrats could count on you to vote I don't want to say in lockstep, but basically with whatever the Democratic leadership want on budgets?
Yes, I'm committing to do that. And I'm also committing to do something else. I'm not going to run for re-election. I'm only doing this for one term. I'm not a politician. I did not ever want to be a politician. I'm doing this because we need to do something now. We can't survive 32 more months of what we've seen for the past 16. Full stop.
Well, and you certainly know the law, and you understand how conservative lawyers think, having been a constitutional lawyer who practiced at the highest levels. You've argued at the Supreme Court. You are a member of the Federalist Society. Do you still consider yourself an originalist when it comes to how you interpret the law?
I consider myself an originalist in the following sense. The original intent of Congress was not to have federal courts enjoining a criminal president. It was to have Congress impeach and remove that president. That's the originalism I'm standing for here. The originalism of Congress reasserting its power to act as a check on the president, because that's the reason why they created an executive, is they thought that Congress would have the gumption, the strength, to exercise its power and duty to remove a criminal from office. And Congress has not shown that, not just because Republicans have failed. Obviously the Republicans are cowardly and corrupt, but the Democrats have not pushed hard enough on this.
Well, I think, to the spirit of Catherine's original question, I think some of what New York Democrats specifically might be wondering as they look at at one point people were joking it was kind of like a clown car of candidates in your particular race.
The taxi cab, I think.
Taxi cab, clown car, whatever you want to call it. As they're trying to pick who they think is their fighter. At a time when New York has just elected a Democratic Socialist for mayor. In primaries in particular, the sort of left-wing faction, they're some of the most energized at the time. And it's the same in any party. That's sort of who's coming out during a primary. Why should they trust you to 100% be on their team, given some of your history, given the fact that, as she said, you're more recently brought into the fold here? You have some criticisms of someone like Zoran Mamdani, the mayor here. So you might not see yourself as being fully part of the sort of left flank here in New York. So are you their right messenger?
Well, I want to join with them. I want to work with them. I share their goals. And at the end of the day, from a federal governmental standpoint, from the standpoint of Congress and the executive presidency, we can't get anywhere in that direction to achieve those goals, to work together, to find solutions together until we have a government that is not being run lawlessly and by a criminal, a rapist. We can't do that. And that's my point, is we need to join forces and not fight over what details of solutions. We want affordable health care. Do we want Medicare for all, or do we want a public option like I do? It's like, look, I'm willing to discuss all of that. But right now, none of that is real until Donald Trump is gone. And that's why I'm telling people, if you want to move to the next stage where we can work on those issues, elect me for this one term, and I will help get rid of this guy sooner rather than later and help push Democrats to fighting this guy harder now, because we don't have the luxury of time.
All right, George, let me kind of pick up on that a little bit and ask you a slightly different question about foreign policy. And it's about where the Democratic Party is on the situation in the Middle East. Tonight, we're seeing firsthand again that the situation in the Middle East is real. It's still going on, the war. And so you're going to probably, if you get elected, have to deal with whether or not Congress continues to fund Israel, provide resources to Israel. And I wanted to ask you about that, because in the debate, you didn't call it a genocide. You said it didn't meet that threshold, although you had criticism of what Israel was doing in Gaza and across the region. My question to you is about the Democratic Party. The views that the Democratic Party has on Israel, I believe we have a poll in an NBC News poll, 57% of Democratic voters said they hold a negative view of Israel, 13% view it positively. On the topic of aid to Israel, which you want to continue. You don't oppose cutting you oppose cutting aid to Israel. The New York Times Siena poll shows 74% of Democratic voters oppose providing additional economic and military support. Only 20% favor more aid to Israel. It seems that you are in the minority here.
I am in the minority. I guess I am in the minority here.
What do you say to Democratic voters who say we want to move the party away from this endless constantly providing military aid to Israel, and you're saying no, we should continue providing.
Look, let me be clear. I don't support Bibi Netanyahu. Right. I'm not a fan of Bibi Netanyahu. I'm not a fan of how the latter stages of the Gaza conflict have been conducted. But I look at this taking a longer view, that Israel is a longtime friend of the United States, and I think a lot of people in this country are using that issue for domestic politics and focusing on Israel to a unique degree, that in a way that's really, really unhealthy. I think what we need to do is to get past the point where we get to the point where we have a normal president who can put normal kinds of pressure on the Israeli government not to do the things that a lot of people don't like. And what happened with Trump is he basically gave a green light for all sorts of things.
But aren't you doing that the same with endless support to Israel?
No, I'm not. I don't.
I mean, 74% is a significant number.
Look, again, I don't believe in cutting off aid to Israel right now. I absolutely don't believe in that. But I do understand the concerns, and I do share those concerns. But my focus is on saving our country. Yeah. And that's what I'm talking about first.
All right, George Conway, it's great to see you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.